This video is being made to benefit the Danbury Railway Museum. Learn about their campaign to help save some rare New York Central motive power through the link in the description. In the 1940s, railroads' motive power was in the midst of a transition. While some railroads had been sold on diesel-electric locomotives, many were still siding with steam as the tried-and-true method. Railroads like the New York Central were determined to use the latest breakthroughs to get the most out of their engines, especially if the end result could push the technology's limits and perhaps become one of the greatest steam locomotive designs of all time. Diesel power had been coexisting alongside steam since the previous decade, but it seemed inevitable that diesels would win out in the end. That incursion had been put on hold because of World War II, and while the technology was diverted to military machinery, railroads had to bank on steam power to keep their tonnage rolling. With diesel power still relatively new though, some railroads still preferred steam for the foreseeable future. The New York Central's chief engineer was Paul Kiefer, a designer of locomotives and rolling stock since 1926. His previous feats included the 464 Hudsons, their mainstay passenger locomotive, and the latest generation 482 Mohawks, their dual-service choice of power. During the war, both of these engines revealed some setbacks. The Hudsons couldn't wrestle as much tonnage as the Mohawks, and the Mohawks were getting maxed out by traffic demands despite better reliability. With post-war projections of traffic levels set at all-time highs, the War Production Board granted permission for the Central to start building an all-new design in 1944. Most railroads had gone with 484 Northerns for their mainline muscle, and were favored for their flexibility and power output at high speeds. Previously, the railroad had an experimental 484 built that proved unsuccessful and was delegated to moving cars around Selkirk Yard near Albany. What Kiefer had in mind for this new 484 was something very distant from this early flop. Kiefer's goal was to squeeze as much power out of the engine as possible within the Central's tight clearances. Every modern breakthrough of the time was incorporated: roller bearings on all axles and side rods, air brake reservoirs cast into the frame, an open-type feed water heater with an extra-large superheater, and valve ports to distribute air throughout the flues and into the firebox. Because of the boiler's size and projected power output, there wasn't even room for a steam dome. An all-new boiler design allowed for it to be incorporated within the boiler barrel, therefore making room for the boiler to expand with greater steaming capacity. That allowed for a cylinder horsepower rating of 6,680, recorded at 85 miles per hour. Coupled behind was the largest tender in the Central's fleet, a PT-type centipede tender that carried enough coal to run from Croton Harmon to Buffalo 500 miles apart without refueling. Unlike the tenders of the rival Pennsylvania Railroad, the pressure valves in the water scoop allowed it to take on water via track pans at speeds up to 80 miles per hour rather than slowing down to 40. In all, 26 of the S1 types were delivered from Schenectady, with an additional one-off S2 with poppet valves. In keeping with the Central's tradition of naming locomotives after rivers, these new 484s became known as Niagaras. In 1945, they bumped the Hudsons and Mohawks off of the high-profile passenger runs like the 20th Century Limited, Empire State Express, Laurentian, and more besides. They also supplemented the Mohawks in freight service, predominantly on time-sensitive freight runs like the Pacemaker. The Niagaras were taking up the slack in the remnants of war-swollen traffic volumes and doing it with these, working up to 30,000 miles every month. Operating crews discovered that the boiler was very free steaming, meaning that with little effort, it could generate steam faster than was being used. After just 11 months of service, number 6024 had racked up over 250,000 miles on a 6-day-per-week basis with no significant servicing downtime. With those figures, it was easy to see how much effort was put into the Niagara's design. But how did it stack up against other fellow 484s? Few would come close to matching their performance stats, but only one could beat them in tractive effort. The Norfolk and Western J could put out 80,000 pounds of tractive effort, 20,000 more than the S1s. The Central's main rival, the Pennsylvania Railroad, had made a bet on duplex power, with the 8 drivers split into 2 groups of 4. The Pennsy believed they would harness the same pulling power as 484s, but with lower maintenance costs owing to its lighter valve gear, allowing for better stability at high speeds with no more significant wear on the track. The Central proposed duplicating this concept with the C1A type, which would have been introduced with the first S1s, but never materialized. Facing head-on, the Niagaras and the duplexes were almost on par with each other. They could match each other in speed and pulling power, with one exceptional difference. The Niagaras didn't have the specialized features that made the duplexes maintenance hogs and could work day in and day out without any specialized treatment. By the time the last of the duplexes were retired, only the poppet-valved S2 had been delegated to being a hangar queen. But in reality, there was only one locomotive that could vanquish the Niagaras. Also being delivered to the Central, at the same time as the Niagaras, was the first of the new E7 diesel streamliners from the electromotive division of General Motors. So far, the Niagaras were almost exactly on par with the E units, racking up enough mileage on a 6-day-per-week basis to match any offering from EMD's catalog. They both entered service at a pivotal moment for the country's third-largest coal hauler, now fueled by post-war optimism. The best way to decide which would get to take on the future was to turn over both examples to the Central's in-house engineering staff. Paul Kiefer would lead the study in what would come to be known as a practical evaluation of railroad motive power. 6 Niagaras went up against 3 E7 twin-unit Lasheps, with the rule that no teammate would go out of service for maintenance. Beginning in early 1946, the E units were split between 3 eastbound and westbound runs between Harmon and Chicago, and also to Mattoon, Illinois. This gave the engines a total service mileage of 928 and 1,000 miles respectively. In 12 months, the 6 units racked up over 29,000 miles per unit, which worked out to over 900 miles per day. On October 1st, the steamers took over. Almost immediately, some hindrances came to light. Because of the Niagara's immense size and weight, they couldn't be tested on the entire length of the Big 4 route leading to St. Louis, inhibiting their flexibility. On the water-level route to Chicago, where they handled the same trains as the E's, things went well until December, when a coal miner strike disrupted the steamer's fuel supply. Unable to travel at their full range, the Niagaras went off to other duties while the strike lasted for 13 days. Until then, the Niagaras had accumulated over 26,000 miles per month, noticeably less than the diesels. The strike, undoubtedly, didn't help. Winter had fully settled in, and steam was faced with even more setbacks. More than coal and water shortages, coal wouldn't burn effectively at low temperatures, piston and valve packing would start leaking, and bits of machinery would break or stop working, whether it was feed water equipment or the tender's water scoop. Additionally, roundhouse crews working inside the engines had to wear heat suits because the fires weren't entirely dropped, in anticipation of another call to service. Getting steam to perform at its best always took specific infrastructure and a workforce dedicated to their labor intensiveness, but the difficulties always intensified during the worst weather conditions. For the Niagaras to perform on par with its diesel brethren, 30,000 miles per month, 6 days per week, it only exacerbated the problems. When the report was published in June 1947, the figures said it all. The diesels had steam beat on annual mileage, average miles per month, and hours of utilization and availability. The E7s not only did their work with even less maintenance downtime, but also without all of the steam-specific infrastructure like water track pans, ash pits, and coaling towers. In the study, Kiefer would go on to express hopes in further developments with turbine motive power, along with extensive electrification for the Central. Neither prospects materialized. 4 years after the study was published, the first Niagara was withdrawn. The lone S2, although proving to be statistically better in service, had long been set back by maintenance issues with its poppet valves and became a hangar queen, a source of parts for its litter siblings. The Niagaras, along with most other steam engines, made their last stand in the Midwest. Now handling bottom-of-the-barrel freight movements, they didn't perform all that well at lower speeds, and signs of aging were catching up fast. The passage of time revealed metallurgy issues in the firebox wrappers, and insufficient water treatment in track pans discovered too late. The main problem was the boiler's material, a rolled nickel-steel alloy used in most engines this late in the steam era. Although it was said to be stronger and lighter, construction practices of the time put them behind the curve. By 1955, their equipment trusts were expiring, which meant that the railroad had paid off the bank loans to purchase the engines a decade earlier. Only then did retirements begin in earnest. The vast majority would be off the roster by March of 1956, with numbers 6014 and 6015 holding out until that August. Compared to their PRR contemporaries, the Niagaras get less recognition. Although a stark and foreboding contrast with other mainline steamers, even in the Central's family tree, it beat almost every other steam engine in every metric, and perhaps was the one that came the closest to besting the diesel. The Niagaras were in a class of their own, with performance stats and records that will likely never be repeated or broken. In fact, only a few physical remnants of the New York Central survive compared to other railroads. When it comes to rolling stock, there are a select few freight and passenger cars, some diesels, a handful of steam engines, and even fewer electric engines. Even today, some survivors are still in danger of being lost. One of the more dire cases is being fought by the Danbury Railway Museum in Connecticut, as they work tirelessly to save two rare electric locomotives, which would have worked alongside the Niagaras to bring passengers to and from New York City. These engines are the prototype S motor number 100 and the last surviving T motor number 278. The land they sit on is slated for redevelopment, with rail equipment all around them now scrapped. Unless these electrics are moved soon, they're in danger of being scrapped too. So the museum is moving heaven and earth to get these units out of harm's way and bring them to their site in their namesake town, where they would be cosmetically restored and displayed alongside other rare equipment from the Northeast. The ad revenue from this video will go towards helping the museum's fundraiser, but that will take time, and time is of the essence to save these motors. You can contribute directly to their fundraiser through the link in the description and give these rare motors a well-deserved safe haven for years to come. Every little bit helps.